Hello, and welcome back to Today's American Flyer Trains for the continuation of the rebuild of number 370, the General Motors American Flyer Diesel Road Switcher GP-7 Type 1 from 1950. We're ready to move on now with hopefully what will be the last step, and that's the rebuild of the motor and the motor chassis. Now it appears with the removal of the weight, there'll be enough room to allow these wires to help extend and drop the motor down far enough, which will be good access to work on its smaller parts. The only thing that holds it in are these two screws that are on either side of the yoke assembly, which also serves as a field clamp. And therein lies part of the challenge that I just noticed. There's a tab here in the body, as a matter of fact you can see it right there, that limits the range of motion, the lateral range of motion of the truck, and that's a good thing. It doesn't need to swing at extremes. It needs to be held in. However, that in combination with the retainer ring on the top hide the availability of getting to what are called the field adjustment screws, the field centering screws, and they're buried. Hard to even get them on the camera. Right there. They're on either side of the field clamp, which also serves as the yoke assembly for the truck and the motor. So I have a couple of options. One is to bend this tab downward, which would allow a greater range of motion, which would expose those centering screws on the clamp. In other words, it would allow me to turn the clamp beyond this piece right here that's part of the chassis of the train. I don't really like bending things like that if I don't have to. There's always that risk that it pops off. So I look for another option. And another option is to remove the retainer ring right here, right there on top of the motor, that retainer ring. I have extras should that one break, and then possibly extend this wire down, the wire that only goes to the light right here, extend it down far enough that I can drop it through, and again extend the motor down far enough which I can get to those screws that center the field. Centering the field is really important, and I believe I've noticed in trying to operate this motor that it might not be turning. The motor might not be turning over. Their armature might not be rotating because it's touching the field, which just can't happen. So let me see what I can do off camera and I'll be back. As suspected, releasing the retainer ring allowed me to drop the motor down. However, that was not enough. This wire right here that comes out of the very top where the retainer ring is goes to the lamp socket. And it wasn't quite long enough for me to stand this motor up and have it freestanding so that I can work on it, especially centering the field. It confirmed, once I got it in this position, that the field is loose. And these field centering screws are used to center it and tighten it in place. And of course, in this particular piece, I needed to gain access to this, whereas it's a lot easier on the later locomotives because there is a field clamp that is separate from the motor clamp or yoke assembly that holds the motor on the train. Here, they're one and the same. Without dropping this down sufficiently, I couldn't get to these, but these are very critical for the centering of the field on inside of it and on the armature. So I broke the solder point up here, released the solder point right here on the lamp socket so that I could extend this wire right here down through the opening that holds the motor, and I should be able to place the frame on its side and the motor standing up, which is exactly what I need or prefer to work on it. This also confirmed that the brushes and the brush holders are not even positioned correctly over the commutator. The commutator doesn't look all that dirty, and it doesn't look like it's grooved, which means the brushes must be okay. It shouldn't have been any metal-to-metal contact. And this isn't the dirtiest diesel engine motor I've ever seen. So it looks like removing all these screws in order for me to get to the armature is going to be pretty easy. I'm going to start with the removal of the motor clamp and the field clamp right here by removing a black screw, just like this one, on the other side, and now the motor should be able to be dropped out in its entirety. Releasing the motor and the field clamp, which is now lying right here, I'm going to be able to gain access to the remainder of the motor, including being able to remove the field, but I can't lift it off, of course, because it wraps around the armature. So we're going to have some other things to release. I noticed one thing when I was removing the motor and the field clamp that has the field adjusting screws on it, that the screw on the far side was very loose. And that could account for the fact that this was not clamping down on the field, just a possibility. But of course, that's what these field adjustment screws, centering screws, are for, is to make sure the field is perfectly centered over the armature, not touching it, held in place so that the armature may freely rotate. Up next will be removing 6 screws, and they're identical on either end. The end screws do nothing more than hold this cap or top or lid that goes over the worm drive or the worm drive cover. 4 screws on either closest to the motor hold down the bearing straps. Now this one holds down, these two hold down only the bearing strap, which is applying pressure to hold the armature in place. These not only hold the bearing strap that holds the armature in place, but they also hold the brush bracket assembly that holds and allows these brush arms here, the brush holders, to actually stand up and stand in the correct position using these springs. So that's what I'm going to do next, is remove all 6 of these screws, carefully mapping them on something that shows me exactly where they are to be returned, and then we should be able to start lifting things off and taking a closer look. With the removal of the screws, now I'm able to gain access to all the motor components. Of course, the motor and field bracket, here the field itself, the brush bracket assembly, the brush holders, the brushes, the armature, and I was noticing on the armature that the commutator does not seem to be overly dirty or worn. There was a little bit of scratching on it. The slots don't even seem to be dirty. The black slots there that separate the areas on the commutator don't even appear to have any carbon in them. And of course, the worm gears are rather greasy, as are the gearboxes on the chassis. I've also identified that there are thrust plates here. It looks like this grease is pliable. I'll find out a little bit more about it when I start scraping it out, and that will be the first step. I'll simply use a number 11 X-Acto knife, which is easy to use, and makes it easy to reach these large clumps of grease. Get all that out of there before I blast it with AutoZone brake cleaner, and eventually get to the polishing stage of cleaning. And that's about going to be the extent of this video. I'm not going to return, and we will not see the next video until we start the reassembly, because the cleaning is just a lot of washing and blasting with AutoZone brake cleaner to get the excess of grease off, cleaning the armature, cleaning the brushes, and it's just kind of manual labor to get to that point. So, thanks again for watching Dave's American Flyer Trains. So long, everyone.